Well, I welcome back to the show a woman that really needs no introduction. You're a friend of the show already. You have one of the most popular episodes that I've ever had on. The re-release tripled the numbers. Fiona Patten, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. It's great to see you again and in your new home by the looks of things.
Very much so. Yes, thank you. I'm proud to be a homeowner, and no secrets here. I do proudly have the Fiona Patten for Senate core flute up on my front window as we speak. So no illusions here to the listeners. This is an endorsement for a candidate.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, with the release of this episode, we are days away from a federal election in which you
Mm,
are running for the Senate for the Legalise Cannabis Party. We are
yeah.
going to have a chat about that in a moment, but last weekend was 420. How was your 420 in the park?
I absolutely love 420. It's this amazing day where you come together with like-minded people. You peacefully, sadly, we're still protesting, where in other countries they're celebrating their law reform. Here, we're still protesting for law reform. But it really is a gorgeous, chill day. You have great conversations with great people. We had a really good band this year. So that was all the good things. The weather was lovely. It was a, really perfect day, except we probably had like 300 people in and out. There was over 50 police officers there with sniffer dogs, um, going around harassing people, harassing patients. So patients were there, they had a script, um, and they were then being taken over to, for further investigation and then let go. I thought they'd only arrested 8 people, but I did hear later that they had arrested 21. My understanding is that all of them were released without charge and with a warning. However, it really dissuades people. And as I was coming to the park, I saw people look at the row of 15 paddy wagons at the crossroads and think, nah, that's not for me. It's so people were intimidated. I know patients were really intimidated by having dogs come and sniff at them and stand by them. So, and I feel sorry for the police because I think when you have a law that requires 50 police to come to a peaceful picnic where there is not a single bit of trouble, and you've got 50 police there to uphold this bad law, then and it obviously is a bad law. And I think the police would have agreed with us that there was far better things for them to be doing on an Easter Sunday. My understanding is it's believed that it cost about $250,000
Wow.
for them. Um, I can assure you it didn't cost us anywhere near that to get a generator and get some speakers and get a band and um and set up a beautiful picnic. But they set up, yeah, it cost them about $250,000. They were there probably from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5:30 in the evening. Long day, public
Nice bit of overtime
holiday.
for those cops.
Yeah, it would have been a good little earner. A lot of people were suggesting they were also there getting the contact highs. Um,
Oh, that's amazing.
and and I don't know whether, I don't know whether it's wrong to report this, but apparently one police officer was overheard and he was looking after a dog. And at 4:20, when the sort of plumes went up, despite the police there being there, someone said, "Well, why aren't you sending the dogs?" And he said, "I can't send the dogs into that." You know. So apparently, smoking in numbers helps avoid detection.
That sounds like a plan. That could be my strategy going forward. Every time I need a joint, I'll have it with 50
Always smoke with a
people.
friend. Yeah.
Well, Fiona, you've been an experienced state politician. You are responsible for countless progressive forms in Victoria. And this election, you're running with the Legalise Cannabis Party. The theme is unfinished business. When we spoke last time, it seemed like, maybe you were willing to tie up those loose ends and continue to support the next generation. I'm incredibly pleased you're back, but let's talk about this unfinished business.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And you're absolutely right. I was finished, and I was really enjoying working with David and Rachel, the two legalized cannabis MPs in Victoria, um, to sort of get them on their way and really smooth out that those initial 12 months. Um, But after I'd closed Reason and the the national director of the Legalise Cannabis Party is a good mate of mine. In fact, we founded the Sex Party together, uh, and significant badgering by him and many others in the party, made me see the light, as it
Yeah.
were, and realize that I really needed to step up to run for the Senate. But it is unfinished business, Paul, and when I did the use of cannabis inquiry, when I put up legislation to decriminalise and legalise cannabis, um, the problem was the federal legislation. So the Federal Crimes Act makes it an offence to cultivate, possess, and use cannabis. Now, that law overrides any state legislation.
Right.
So any state legislation would be in breach of the Federal Act and therefore unconstitutional. So until we change the Federal Act, we really need, well, it's very difficult for states to progress on drug law reform. And I actually firmly believe that drug law reform is a state issue, but we need the federal parliament to get out of the way. The Prime Minister keeps saying, that cannabis regulation is a state matter, not a federal one. So I'm hoping that if I'm successful, he will stand by that statement and support amending the Federal Act to enable states to regulate.
Obviously, politicians love walking around to different pubs and having a beer. Do you reckon Albo's the kind of guy that might enjoy a joint once in a while?
Well, he pleaded the fifth when asked this question. So, yes, I think the man has inhaled.
Yeah.
I think I think there's no doubt. And look, and he would know, like we all do, he would know numerous people who do choose cannabis as their
Yes.
social tonic, um, or who choose it as their choice of medicine. Uh, so there would be no doubt that he would have family members who would choose cannabis as their tonic, whether that's for health or just for pleasure. I can't pick Dutton. He won't confirm or deny, but I suspect 47% of the population, or it's probably a lot more than that now.
Yeah.
If you look at people under 60, the vast majority of us have tried cannabis at one stage in our lives. So I would imagine that if Dutton's not in that camp, his family, parts of his family would be. It's just statistics.
Dutton strikes me as the kind of guy who probably had a puff one time and didn't like the empathy that it created. So maybe test it again. Oh, I'm feeling feelings. What is
Yeah,
this?
I don't like these feelings.
Well, your track record does speak for itself, and it is a fantastic thing to see you running for Parliament again. I'm wondering what the strategy for cannabis legalization on a federal level is, compared to what we've seen attempted in the States. We've seen a federal bill from the Greens that, I've been not shy in saying was a flawed bill. I love to see the attempt. What does the approach look like in Canberra, and who are the allies you'd be looking to work with?
First and foremost, you cannot legalize cannabis without the Legalise Cannabis Party.
Agreed.
So people criticize us for, maybe not supporting the Greens. We're trying to get elected, and and we will fight to legalize cannabis. We will fight for patients of medicinal cannabis to make sure that it is easy to access and affordable. Look, I think, as I said at the top of the show, I think the first thing we need to do is amend the Federal Act,
Yeah.
the Federal Criminal Code, so that states can move towards regulation. Um, I would hope that I would, if it is a Labor government, I hope that both sides of government would agree that uh, drug regulation and drug law reform should be a state matter. So that is the first thing that needs to happen. Um, and then we can start looking at what the options for regulation are. As we know, not only does our constitution require state legislation to be in line with federal legislation, constitution also does not allow it does not allow states to implement excises or taxes. People may remember that back in the 90s, tobacco excise, alcohol excise, petrol excises were all paid directly to the state.
Right.
That changed. There was a High Court decision that changed, and now those excises are collected by the federal government. So, having a legalized cannabis senator in the federal parliament will enable those conversations to happen more easily, and certainly you'll have someone advocating for them. Once we open the door for states to do that, and I think there is a lot of interest in the states to look at reform, and even just modest reform, like allowing people to grow six plants or
Yeah.
share cannabis, which I think are two really impactful reforms that could be game changers just in themselves. Uh, we need to change the Federal Act to ensure that that legislation is not challenged. And I have no doubt that our opponents would challenge legislation once they saw cannabis reform gaining momentum.
Reddit is often a place that is filled with kind of vitriol and weird conversation. But last night I saw a comment that I loved, and that was that Fiona Patten did more in her decade in Parliament than most career politicians do in 30 or 40 years. What are the lessons you're taking from the Victorian Parliament into this federal campaign?
You know, I'm never going to be the Prime Minister. I'm,
I'm disappointed in
I'm
that.
putting it out there right now. I've never, I'm never going to be changing the curtains in the lodge. That is not my intent. And in fact, this for us, it's not about power; it's about policy. And I think that actually sets us apart from, certainly from the major parties, but even from the Greens, that is their intent, that they want to be in government. I don't. I
Yes.
want to influence government. I'm a lobbyist. Effectively, I'm an advocate, and my job is to do that. Now, being in Parliament makes that job even that, it makes that job even more powerful. There is no doubt that the next government will not have balance of power in the Senate. Now, for 8 years, I didn't horse trade, but I worked with the government to achieve reforms. All of those reforms, none of them were in my name. I might have been the person who initially wrote the bill, and the bill was finally passed, but it was never passed in my name. It was always a government bill. Uh, and I have no problem with that. Absolutely no problem, because we achieved the reform. And I think that's what I've learned is you've got to work with others. You can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so if you can make two steps of progress instead of, reaching utopia, then you've made progress. And I think that was how I operated, and that was how we were able to achieve progress, whether that was in, safe access zones around abortion clinics, or spent convictions, or, sex work law reform, or the decriminalisation of sex work. All of that was by working with others, not by trying to be the most powerful.
I love that. I think it's quite admirable of most of the Legalise Cannabis Party and the MPs in place. The desire is really to not be in power. It's to come in, do the work, and then,
Yeah.
off we go and retire,
Yeah.
with some fat doobies or whatever it might be. So, Rachel has said that, David has said that. It's kind of the ultimate goal is to come in, do the work, and then off we go.
Yeah.
And that's not lifelong power hungriness. That's a desire
No.
to make positive change.
That's right. And really that is what sets us apart from other parties, is that we are determined advocates for reform, but we're not looking for power.
Absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned at the top of the show the inquiry into cannabis when you were in state parliament, and we spoke about it on the last episode. That was essentially all the recommendations were ignored by the state government. How can we as individuals, continue to mobilize to put the pressure on our local politicians or our federal politicians as well to make these changes, to listen to the science and the education? Because this is science-based drug reform. This is harm reduction. This is harm minimization. How do we get them to listen?
We have to speak up. We actually have to give them something to listen to. So, and I know this is really hard because the stigma around cannabis use is strong. You know, it's hard for people who've got full-time, who've got jobs to come out and talk about their cannabis use because it's a crime.
Yeah.
Um, However, I think we are going to have to come out of the closet. There's 2.6 million of us in Australia that use cannabis um, illicitly, illegally. Now, we need to be talking to that. We need to be talking to our local MPs to say, why is my social tonic a crime and yours is not? We need to be asking those questions. And I know privately, and I know Rachel and David have had these same conversations. You speak to members of parliament privately, and none of them are opposed to cannabis reform. Literally, I
Yeah.
mean, there'll be the odd one. There'll be the odd one.
Yeah.
But the majority are just like the public. 80% of them would privately support cannabis reform. Now, they just need the balls to do it. But I think they need the support to do it as well. You know, they might hear from the Delgado Institute and the Drug Free Australia and the Australian Christian Lobby all telling them how bad drugs are. You know, it's always the religious types that are,
Always.
down on drugs and
Yeah.
down on pleasure. But they need to hear from us, and they need to hear from us. And the more they hear from us, and the more that we ask questions about this, the more, um, sometimes it gives them the more power in their arm to start having those conversations in their caucuses, in their party rooms. And we can't change this without the major parties, I'm afraid. They, it's, it's I'm not happy to say that, but we cannot reform without the support of major parties to reform. But we can get it. And, most of them, as the sort of the age that as the baby boomers retire out, you've got the Gen Xers, you've got the millennials, you've got all of those people in Parliament, and the majority of them will have used cannabis in their life, um, and the vast majority of them would not oppose law reform. It's just getting them to do it. And I know this was hard, like voluntary assisted dying. The Premier said right at the start, I will not do that.
Yeah. Wow.
I will not do that. Absolutely no. When he was asked it on the day that I was elected. Um, Fast track 3 years, and we got assisted dying in that term. So, and that was through people power, and that was through stories being told, and people, and people coming out, um, their end of life choices. So in some ways, we have to come out. And I think it was the same when you look at the marriage equality debate, or even the fact that less than 30 years ago, gay sex was illegal in Tasmania.
Yeah. Yeah.
Less than 30 years ago. But that was changed by people coming out. And I'm afraid that it's hard, but it is important that we talk about this, and that we talk about it with our friends, but we also talk about it. We write to our members of parliament.
We're all stewards of this plant, of this industry, of this movement. One of my big sentiments is that if you enjoy cannabis, if you use cannabis, if it's therapeutic for you, someone that's got the benefit, you do have somewhat of an obligation to share that with someone. There will be roadblocks, there will be people who it's not worth changing the mind of. I keep using this anecdote all the time where my mum's quality of life in her 70s has shot through the roof with medicinal cannabis, but she still wishes I wasn't using it. It's
Yeah.
not worth trying to fight that. I'm like, you know what? Her quality of life's better. She's in good hands. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to try and change her mind. She's not going to convince her friends, but I convinced her. On the counter, there's so many people who are willing to go, oh, I start to understand why this works for you. So we do have this responsibility, if we're getting benefits from it, or someone we love is, to just share that story. And I've got to say, working in the industry and being in this space for so long, I do exist in a bit of an accepting bubble. And it is
Mm,
always important to remind myself that there's a lot of people out here still judging our choices and still judging the use. But like you said, there's a few million of us, we're not a small number. And
no,
even the fallacy of calling this a single issue, single issue party, there's
that's right.
millions of us being represented here.
That exactly. 11% of us, as I say, you use cannabis, you know, and I mean, I don't know, like, this idea of medicinal versus adult use. I mean, it's a very blurred line, isn't it? It's
Yes.
very grey. You know, here's a plant medicine that makes you feel better.
Yeah.
Uh, yes, that could be medicinal, but it just makes me feel better. As as do many other things,
Well, that's yes. As I speak as someone with anxiety that uses cannabis to treat that quite successfully, euphoria, whilst might not be seen as a medical treatment, is a hell of a way to end a horrible day. So if I have something that makes me feel euphoric after a tough day, how is that not medicinal or at the very least therapeutic?
Yeah. And isn't it wonderful reading on some of the medicinal packets, like the side effects?
Yeah.
One of the side effects is euphoria,
Oh, damn.
along with
That
dry mouth, red eyes, euphoria. I was like, oh, give me
sucks.
some
Yeah.
of that.
I don't see that as a side effect at all.
No.
Well,
No,
Fiona,
that's exactly what I intended to achieve.
so a few thousand votes can tip the balance in the Senate. So what's your pitch to the undecided voter who might think that, a legalized cannabis vote is a single issue vote, or, that maybe this isn't something for them? What's your pitch to the undecided voter?
Look, I think there's probably two points. One is, look, I've had 8 years in Parliament as a politician, and 20 years as an advocate outside Parliament. So I feel like I can do the job, and that I would be very good at representing our community, but also representing Victoria. And I work hard, and I would love the opportunity and the privilege to doing that. The second thing is, I'm not going, I'm not competing against the Greens. I'm not competing against Labor. I'm not competing against even the Liberals. Greens will win one seat, one Senate seat. Libs will win two Senate seats, and Labor will win two Senate seats. It's the sixth Senate seat that is up for grabs. Now, at the moment, the last election that went to Clive Palmer.
Right.
This election, it will be a fight between cannabis and Clive Palmer. Now, I know who I would rather in the and so, but we need first preferences. So we need people to vote us first. So vote us first, then vote for your other team. We're kind of like Audi. Come to us first. We know you see others.
And look, Fiona, over time, I've seen that Aldi is the only place I need to shop. So.
Exactly. And then you'll come to learn that we are the only thing you need. But right now, if they can put us first, because otherwise, we will see a conservative anti-cannabis party get elected. Now, and I mean, you might want them in there as well, but put us first so we can win the last spot.
Yeah, yeah, that's very, very simple instructions there. So, listeners, you know how to vote, legalize cannabis, look for the leaf on the ballot. Fiona, before we let you go, how can listeners support your campaign before election day over the next, 5 or 6 days?
We need volunteers. It's amazing when you hand a voter a card around legalized cannabis. Some of them just go, hell yeah, go in there and vote. Others just go, oh yeah, no, I never thought of that, and we get a support. So it really does make a difference. Like where you have a person wearing a smile and a bright green t-shirt with a beautiful leaf on it. Um, it makes people smile, and it also makes people consider that as a choice. So if you can spend a couple of hours on a polling booth with like-minded people, get in touch. We'd love to have you. We'd love to have you in the green shirt, in the green leaf.
Fantastic. Well, I've made no secret of my endorsement of you. I've made no secret of my appreciation for you as a person, as a politician. You've already done so much for our state and therefore our country and our people. And I wish you nothing but the best in these next few days as people head to pre-polling and ultimately the election on Saturday. If and when you make it to Canberra, what's the first thing you're shaking up on the hill?
Well, I mean, Canberra is the only place where it's legal to grow
Yes.
cannabis in Australia. I guess that says it all.
Answers itself. Well, Fiona Patten, it's been an absolute pleasure. You are a national treasure. I wish you nothing but the best in this election.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you.